The judge's voice cut through the marble-columned courtroom like a blade through silk. "Mrs. Victoria Chen, please state your total net worth for the record." My mother-in-law's face went ashen as I responded clearly. $84,300,000, Your Honor." The gasps from Marcus's family echoed through the chamber as 12 years of condescending smiles and patronizing comments about how I had married up evaporated in a single moment of devastating truth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. That Tuesday morning in October would forever divide my life into before and after. Before, when I was the quiet, unremarkable woman who had somehow convinced their successful son to settle for less than he deserved. After, when the carefully constructed fiction of my modest background collapsed under the weight of financial documentation that revealed everything they thought they knew about me had been completely wrong. But let me take you back to where this story truly begins, to understand how a family could live with someone for over a decade, while remaining completely blind to who she actually was. The foundation of my invisible existence within the Morrison family had been established during my very first dinner at their Beacon Hill estate 13 years ago. I remember the precise moment when Marcus's mother, Eleanor Morrison, had assessed me with the calculating gaze of someone appraising livestock at auction, her eyes traveling from my department store dress to my sensible shoes with barely concealed disappointment. "So, Victoria," she had said, her voice carrying the particular inflection wealthy New Englanders use when addressing those they consider beneath their social station, "Marcus tells us you work in accounting." How practical. The pause before practical had been loaded with enough condescension to fill Boston Harbor, establishing immediately that in Eleanor's estimation, I represented a significant step down from the investment banking heiresses and pharmaceutical company daughters she had envisioned for her eldest son. That evening had set the template for every subsequent interaction with the Morrison clan. I was the woman who had mysteriously captured Marcus's affection, despite lacking the obvious qualifications they expected from his romantic partners. No trust fund, no family connections to prominent Boston institutions, no summer home in the Hamptons or winter chalet in Aspen, just Victoria Chen, senior financial analyst at a mid-tier consulting firm, living in a modest Cambridge apartment, and driving a practical Honda Civic that seemed to personally offend Eleanor every time she glimpsed it in their circular driveway. What none of them understood, what Marcus himself had never fully grasped, despite 12 years of marriage, was that my unremarkable exterior had been carefully cultivated as protective camouflage. The department store dresses and sensible shoes were strategic choices designed to deflect attention from assets that would have fundamentally altered every relationship dynamic had they been revealed. My practical accounting career served as perfect cover for managing an investment portfolio that had been generating substantial returns since my 22nd birthday, when a series of calculated risks in emerging technology stocks had transformed a modest inheritance into generational wealth. The inheritance itself represented the final gift from my grandmother, Linwei Chen, a woman whose business acumen had been legendary within San Francisco's Chinatown community but remained invisible to the broader financial world that preferred to conduct business through established networks of privilege and connection. Grandmother Lin had built a small fortune through real estate investments and import business operations that she had managed with razor-sharp precision, while maintaining the appearance of a traditional immigrant grandmother who spoke limited English and deferred to male family members in public settings. Her passing during my final semester at MIT had brought both profound grief and unexpected responsibility. The modest house in Chinatown that I had assumed represented her primary asset had been revealed through probate proceedings to be merely the visible portion of a carefully diversified investment portfolio worth nearly $12 million. Grandmother Lin's attorney, himself a second-generation Chinese-American who understood the cultural complexities of wealth preservation within immigrant families, had explained that she had spent decades converting business profits into blue-chip stocks, municipal bonds, and strategically selected real estate holdings that would provide long-term security for future generations. Your grandmother was remarkably sophisticated in her investment philosophy, Attorney Wong had explained during our initial meeting in his downtown San Francisco office, spreading documents across his mahogany desk with reverential care. She understood that visible wealth creates vulnerability for families without established social protection networks. Everything she built was designed to remain invisible, while generating consistent returns that would enable her descendants to pursue education and opportunity without the financial constraints that had limited her own choices. The philosophy had resonated deeply with my understanding of how wealth and power operated within American society. Having witnessed the casual cruelty with which my Harvard Business School classmates had dismissed peers who lacked family connections or trust fund resources, I had recognized that sudden wealth disclosure would fundamentally alter every relationship and professional opportunity in ways that were impossible to predict or control. Better to maintain my carefully constructed identity as a competent but unremarkable financial professional, while building my inheritance into something even more substantial through strategic investment management. The decision to conceal my wealth from Marcus had been reached gradually rather than through conscious deception. Our relationship had begun during graduate school, when we had both been living on student loan resources and research assistant stipends. The economic equality had created space for genuine connection based on shared interests in international finance and mutual appreciation for each other's intellectual capabilities, rather than transactional calculations about financial advantage or social advancement. Marcus's admission to his family's investment banking firm following graduation had represented a natural career progression that aligned with his professional training and personal interests. My decision to accept a position with a smaller consulting firm had been presented as preference for hands-on client interaction, rather than revelation that I had no need for the substantial salary increases that came with prestigious financial institutions. The work itself provided intellectual stimulation while allowing me to maintain my cover identity as someone whose financial resources were limited to salary income and modest savings accumulated through careful budgeting. Our courtship and early marriage had proceeded according to patterns that reinforced the Morrison family's assumptions about our respective economic circumstances. Marcus paid for expensive dinners and weekend getaways using his banking salary and family trust fund distributions, while I contributed what appeared to be proportional amounts based on my consulting income. The apartment we had shared during our engagement had been selected according to what seemed reasonable for a two-income professional couple establishing themselves in Boston's competitive housing market. Even our wedding had been structured to support the narrative of Marcus marrying slightly beneath his social station. Eleanor Morrison had insisted on managing all arrangements through vendors she had relationships with, presenting the celebration as the Morrison family's generous gift to their son and his practical bride. The ceremony at Trinity Church and reception at the Boston Harbor Hotel had been elegant affairs that showcased the Morrison family's social connections, while reinforcing their role as benefactors, enabling their son's romantic choice to marry for love rather than strategic advantage. The pattern had continued throughout our 12-year marriage as Marcus's career progressed through predictable stages of advancement within his father's firm. Promotions brought salary increases that funded lifestyle upgrades, including the purchase of our Beacon Hill townhouse, luxury vehicle acquisitions, and annual vacation trips to destinations that reinforced our apparent economic trajectory. My consulting work provided steady income that covered approximately 40% of our household expenses, a contribution that seemed appropriate for someone in my position while concealing the investment portfolio that had grown to exceed $80 million through careful management and market appreciation. The invisibility had been maintained through meticulous attention to financial compartmentalization that kept my investment activities completely separate from our joint household accounts and shared financial planning discussions. Personal investment management was conducted through offshore trusts and international brokerage relationships that provided both legal asset protection and practical concealment from domestic financial discovery processes. Tax obligations were managed through accounting firms that specialized in high-net-worth client services, while maintaining strict confidentiality protocols that prevented information disclosure to unauthorized parties. Most importantly, my lifestyle choices had remained consistent with the modest financial profile I had established during graduate school. Designer clothing purchases were avoided in favor of professional attire from mainstream retailers that projected competence without ostentation. Vehicle selections prioritized reliability and fuel efficiency over luxury features that would have raised questions about funding sources. Entertainment and dining preferences emphasized experiences that could be reasonably afforded on consulting income, rather than exclusive venues that catered primarily to inherited wealth demographics. The psychological toll of maintaining this elaborate deception had been significant, but manageable through compartmentalization strategies that treated wealth concealment as an extended undercover assignment with clear strategic objectives. Every condescending comment from Eleanor about my humble background, and every patronizing observation from Marcus's siblings about how fortunate I was to have married into their family, had been absorbed and catalogued as evidence that the deception was working effectively. The most challenging aspect had been watching Marcus's family treat me as a charity case, whose modest contributions to family celebrations and gift-giving occasions reflected limited financial capacity rather than strategic choice to maintain cover identity. Holiday gatherings became exercises in grateful acceptance of Eleanor's pronouncements about how wonderful it was that their family could provide opportunities and experiences I would never have been able to afford independently. Summer vacation invitations were presented as generous inclusions of Marcus's wife in family traditions that were clearly beyond my natural economic reach. The accumulated resentment had been carefully suppressed through focus on long-term strategic objectives that prioritized relationship preservation and family harmony over immediate satisfaction from correcting their misconceptions. Every birthday dinner where Eleanor made pointed comments about my practical gift selections, every family gathering where Marcus's siblings discussed investment strategies and business opportunities while politely changing subjects when I expressed interest, every social event where I was introduced as Marcus's wife who works in accounting, rather than being acknowledged for any independent achievements or capabilities, had been endured through commitment to maintaining the careful balance I had established. The decision to divorce Marcus had emerged from the gradual recognition that our marriage had become another performance venue for identity concealment rather than authentic partnership between equals. His casual dismissal of my professional insights, his automatic assumption that family financial planning was his responsibility despite my actual expertise exceeding his considerably, and his increasing alignment with his family's patronizing attitude toward my background had created emotional distance that could no longer be bridged through strategic patience and long-term thinking. The final catalyst had occurred during a family dinner when Eleanor had made her most devastating observation about my character and worth. "Victoria is so fortunate," she had announced to the assembled Morrison clan while Marcus nodded approvingly, "to have married into a family that values education and achievement. It must be inspiring for someone from her background to see what's possible when you have proper resources and connections." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The comment had been delivered with such casual cruelty, such absolute certainty about my inferiority and gratitude for their tolerance, that something fundamental had shifted in my understanding of what I was willing to endure for the sake of maintaining my cover identity. Eleanor's assumption that I was somehow intellectually or culturally deficient, that my presence at their table represented charity rather than contribution, had crystallized years of accumulated disrespect into a moment of absolute clarity about the true nature of my relationship with the Morrison family. That evening had marked the beginning of the end of my marriage, and the careful identity management that had defined my adult life. The decision to file for divorce had been reached through the same strategic analysis I applied to complex investment decisions, weighing potential outcomes against acceptable risks, while developing implementation plans that would achieve desired results with maximum efficiency and minimum exposure to uncontrolled variables. The choice to reveal my actual financial status during divorce proceedings, rather than continuing the deception, had been calculated to achieve multiple objectives simultaneously. First, accurate asset disclosure would ensure fair property division according to Massachusetts law, while protecting my premarital wealth from community property claims. Second, the revelation would provide definitive correction of 12 years of misconceptions about my capabilities and worth. Most importantly, the truth would finally allow me to stop pretending to be someone I had never been, while establishing clear boundaries around acceptable treatment moving forward. The preparation for this moment had required months of careful coordination with attorneys who specialized in high-net-worth divorce proceedings, and financial analysts who could provide comprehensive documentation of asset valuations and income sources that had remained invisible throughout my marriage. Bank statements, investment portfolio summaries, trust fund documentation, and property valuations had been compiled into presentations that would leave no room for misinterpretation or dispute about my actual financial position. The psychological preparation had been equally intensive. requiring development of emotional resilience strategies that would enable me to maintain composure while watching the Morrison family's entire understanding of our relationship dynamics collapse in real time. Years of suppressed frustration and accumulated resentment would need to be channeled into calm professionalism rather than emotional vindication, despite the temptation to savor their shock and discomfort as compensation for years of condescending treatment. The strategic timing of the revelation had been coordinated to maximize impact, while minimizing opportunities for the Morrison family to develop alternative narratives or damage control strategies that might diminish the effectiveness of the truth disclosure. Divorce proceedings provided the perfect legal framework for comprehensive financial transparency that could not be dismissed or rationalized away through the social manipulation strategies Eleanor had perfected over decades of managing family image and reputation. Now, standing in Suffolk County Superior Court with 12 years of careful deception about to be permanently destroyed, I felt the particular satisfaction that comes from knowing that justice will finally be served through truth rather than continued performance. The moment Judge Patricia Hamilton asked for my net worth statement would represent not just legal procedure, but personal liberation from a role that had required sacrificing my authentic self for the comfort and illusions of people who had never bothered to discover who I actually was. Eleanor Morrison's face had already begun changing as my attorney organized the financial disclosure documents that would systematically dismantle every assumption she had made about my background, capabilities, and worth. The woman who had spent 13 years treating me as a fortunate beneficiary of Morrison family generosity was about to discover that the quiet daughter-in-law she had dismissed as intellectually and socially inferior had been managing a financial empire that dwarfed their own family wealth, while maintaining perfect cover through strategic humility and calculated restraint. The transformation was about to begin, and I was finally ready to stop being invisible. The woman who sat across from Eleanor Morrison at countless family dinners bore little resemblance to the financial strategist who had transformed a $12 million inheritance into an $84 million empire through calculated risk assessment and disciplined market analysis. Victoria Chen had perfected the art of strategic invisibility, crafting an identity so thoroughly unremarkable that even her own husband failed to recognize the sophisticated intelligence that governed every aspect of her professional and personal decision-making. My daily routine had been choreographed with the precision of a military operation designed to maintain operational security, while pursuing objectives that remained invisible to all observers. Each morning began at 5:30, with review of international market conditions and portfolio performance data from Asian exchanges that had closed while Boston slept. The routine occurred in my home office, a modest space that Marcus assumed contained basic accounting software and client files, rather than encrypted terminals providing access to investment platforms managing assets across 14 countries and 6 currencies. The coffee brewing ritual that followed served as transition between my authentic professional identity and the performance role required for maintaining household harmony. By 6:15, I had transformed from portfolio manager overseeing 9-figure asset allocations into Victoria, the practical wife, preparing breakfast while reviewing weather forecasts and traffic conditions that would influence the day's scheduling for both Marcus and myself. The transformation required conscious adjustment of posture, vocal patterns, and conversation topics, from strategic analysis of global economic indicators to domestic concerns about grocery shopping and social calendar coordination. Marcus typically emerged from our bedroom at 7 o'clock, already dressed in the carefully selected professional attire that projected success within Boston's competitive investment banking environment. His morning routine centered on reviewing overnight market developments and client communication priorities, while consuming the breakfast I had prepared according to nutritional requirements that supported his demanding professional schedule. Our conversations during these shared moments focused exclusively on his upcoming meetings, client relationship challenges, and career advancement strategies within his father's firm. The dynamic had evolved gradually over 12 years of marriage, from genuine partnership discussions about mutual professional development into monologues, where Marcus processed his business concerns, while I provided supportive responses and practical suggestions. My own professional activities were summarized through brief mentions of client projects and administrative responsibilities that reinforced the impression of routine accounting work, rather than revealing the sophisticated financial analysis and investment coordination that occupied the majority of my intellectual energy. My consulting firm, Chen Financial Advisory Services, operated from a deliberately modest office suite in Cambridge that projected competent professionalism without suggesting the substantial resources or high-profile client relationships that would have raised questions about my actual earning capacity. The business served as perfect operational cover, providing legitimate source documentation for income levels that appeared consistent with senior financial analyst compensation, while concealing the management fees and investment returns that constituted my primary revenue streams. The client base consisted primarily of small business owners and middle management professionals, seeking assistance with retirement planning, tax optimization, and basic investment strategy development. These relationships provided intellectual stimulation through problem-solving challenges, while maintaining my cover identity as someone whose expertise operated within conventional parameters rather than the sophisticated wealth management strategies I employed for my own asset portfolio. The office itself reflected careful attention to image management that supported assumptions about my economic circumstances. Furniture purchases had been selected for durability and professional appearance rather than luxury features that might suggest excessive spending capacity. Technology investments prioritized functionality over premium specifications, with computer equipment and software licenses appearing appropriate for a single practitioner consulting operation serving middle-market clientele. My assistant, Jennifer Liu, remained the only person outside my legal and financial advisory teams who understood the true scope of my business operations. Jennifer had been recruited from MIT's graduate program in international finance based on her demonstrated expertise in multi-currency portfolio management and her family background providing cultural understanding of wealth concealment strategies within Asian American business communities. Her employment contract included comprehensive confidentiality provisions and compensation packages that reflected the sensitive nature of her responsibilities rather than typical assistant salary ranges. The dual identity management had required development of sophisticated compartmentalization skills that enabled seamless transitions between my authentic professional competence and the carefully constructed image of modest capability that I maintained within family and social contexts. Business meetings with high-net-worth clients and institutional investment managers occurred during hours, when Marcus assumed I was conducting routine consulting activities with small business owners seeking basic financial planning assistance. International travel for investment conferences and due diligence meetings was scheduled during periods when Marcus had his own business travel obligations, eliminating the need for explanations about funding sources for luxury accommodations and first-class airline arrangements that would have contradicted my supposed economic limitations. The travel itself provided essential opportunities for face-to-face relationship building with asset managers and investment partners who expected direct interaction with principals rather than intermediary representatives. The investment philosophy that had generated such substantial returns over the 12-year period reflected lessons learned from my grandmother's approach to wealth building within immigrant communities, where visibility created vulnerability. Portfolio diversification extended beyond traditional asset classes to include emerging market opportunities, technology sector investments, and real estate holdings distributed across multiple geographic regions that provided both growth potential and political stability insurance. Risk management strategies incorporated sophisticated hedging techniques and currency exposure controls that protected against market volatility, while enabling participation in growth opportunities that more conservative approaches might have avoided. The asset allocation framework balanced aggressive growth investments with defensive positions that could preserve capital during economic downturns while maintaining liquidity for strategic acquisition opportunities that emerged during market dislocations. The management structure utilized offshore trusts and international banking relationships that provided both tax efficiency and privacy protection while maintaining full compliance with reporting requirements and regulatory obligations. Professional relationships with attorneys specializing in international asset protection and accountants experienced in complex multi-jurisdictional tax planning ensured that wealth accumulation occurred within appropriate legal frameworks while minimizing unnecessary exposure to domestic discovery processes. The psychological aspects of maintaining this elaborate deception had required development of emotional regulation strategies that enabled me to accept condescending treatment and dismissive comments without revealing the anger and frustration that accumulated through years of systematic underestimation. Family gatherings became performance venues where I demonstrated appropriate gratitude for Eleanor's pronouncements about my good fortune in marrying Marcus, while internally cataloging each patronizing remark as additional evidence of their fundamental misconceptions about my capabilities and worth. The most challenging aspects involved watching Marcus's professional struggles and strategic mistakes, while maintaining the pretense that my insights were limited to basic accounting knowledge rather than revealing the sophisticated understanding of market dynamics and client relationship management that could have substantially improved his career outcomes. His discussions about complex deal structures and client negotiation challenges often included fundamental errors in analysis that I could have corrected easily, but doing so would have raised questions about the source of my expertise. Holiday celebrations required particularly careful performance management, as gift exchanges and celebration planning revealed assumptions about my financial constraints that needed to be reinforced through appropriate spending choices and grateful acknowledgement of the Morrison family's generosity. Eleanor's annual Christmas gathering included elaborate gift presentations, where each family member received carefully selected items that demonstrated thoughtfulness and substantial financial investment, while my contributions were consistently practical items that reinforced perceptions about my modest resources and conventional taste preferences. The cumulative effect of these interactions had been gradual erosion of authentic connection with Marcus, as our relationship increasingly operated according to his family's narrative about our respective roles and worth, rather than genuine partnership between equals. His growing alignment with their perspective on my intellectual limitations and social inadequacies created emotional distance that could no longer be bridged through strategic patience and long-term thinking. Professional relationships within my actual peer community provided essential counterbalance to the diminished role I occupied within family contexts. Investment conferences and industry gatherings included interactions with other high-net-worth individuals who recognized and valued my analytical capabilities and strategic insights. These relationships operated according to principles of mutual respect and intellectual exchange that contrasted sharply with the patronizing dynamics that characterized my marriage and family interactions. The business development activities that had contributed to my portfolio growth included strategic partnerships with institutional investors and private equity firms, who sought access to my expertise in emerging market opportunities and technology sector analysis. These professional relationships were built on demonstrated competence and measurable results, rather than family connections or inherited social capital, providing validation of my actual capabilities that family relationships consistently denied. The decision to maintain wealth concealment despite the personal costs had been reinforced through observation of how sudden wealth disclosure affected other individuals within my social and professional networks. Colleagues who had achieved substantial financial success through business ventures or investment gains often experienced fundamental changes in relationship dynamics, as family members and friends began viewing them primarily as financial resources, rather than individual persons deserving respect and consideration. The protection that anonymity provided extended beyond personal relationships to include professional opportunities and social interactions that might have been compromised by wealth disclosure. Business negotiations and client relationships operated more authentically when participants focused on competence and results rather than making assumptions about motivations and objectives based on known financial status. The strategic planning that had guided 12 years of careful image management included detailed scenarios for eventual wealth disclosure under circumstances that would maximize positive outcomes while minimizing damage to relationships and professional reputation. The divorce proceedings provided ideal framework for comprehensive financial transparency that would be legally required, rather than voluntary revelation that might be interpreted as boastful or manipulative. The preparation phase had included extensive consultation with attorneys experienced in high-net-worth divorce proceedings and financial analysts who could provide comprehensive documentation of asset valuations and income sources that had remained invisible throughout my marriage. The professional team assembled for this purpose understood both the legal requirements for accurate disclosure and the personal objectives for correcting 12 years of misconceptions about my capabilities and worth. The emotional preparation had been equally intensive, requiring development of strategies for maintaining composure while watching the Morrison family process the destruction of their fundamental assumptions about our relationship dynamics. Years of accumulated resentment would need to be channeled into calm professionalism rather than vindictive satisfaction, despite the natural temptation to savor their discomfort as compensation for enduring systematic disrespect and condescension. The timing coordination had been carefully planned to maximize impact while providing legal framework that would prevent attempts to challenge or minimize the significance of the financial disclosure. Court proceedings would require comprehensive documentation that could not be dismissed or rationalized away through the social manipulation strategies that Eleanor had perfected for managing family image and reputation concerns. The transformation that was about to occur represented more than simple correction of factual misconceptions about my economic circumstances. It would fundamentally alter the power dynamics that had governed our family relationships while establishing new foundation for interactions based on accurate understanding of each person's actual capabilities and contributions, rather than assumptions derived from surface appearances and social prejudices. The moment when Judge Hamilton requested my net worth statement would represent the culmination of strategic planning that had extended over more than a decade of patient preparation. The careful construction of my invisible identity was about to be permanently dismantled, revealing the sophisticated financial professional who had been concealed beneath layers of calculated humility and deliberate restraint. Eleanor Morrison's comfortable assumptions about family hierarchy and social superiority were about to be systematically demolished through mathematical precision that would leave no room for alternative interpretations or damage control narratives. The woman who had spent 13 years treating me as an intellectual inferior was about to discover that she had been consistently outmaneuvered by someone whose strategic thinking capabilities had enabled accumulation of wealth that dwarfed her family's inherited resources. The liberation that would accompany this revelation extended beyond personal vindication to include restoration of authentic self-expression that had been suppressed through years of performance requirements. The intelligent, competent, successful woman I actually was could finally emerge from behind the carefully maintained facade of modest capability and grateful accommodation that had defined my public identity throughout my marriage. The foundation had been established for comprehensive transformation of relationship dynamics based on truth rather than convenient fiction, mutual respect rather than patronizing tolerance, and recognition of actual worth rather than assumptions derived from prejudice and social conditioning. The first crack in my carefully constructed facade appeared during a seemingly ordinary Tuesday evening in late September, when Marcus returned from his weekly dinner with Eleanor, carrying the particular expression of frustrated resignation that had become increasingly familiar over recent months. The conversation that followed would reveal systemic problems in our relationship that had been developing beneath the surface, while I remained focused on maintaining operational security around my wealth concealment strategies. "Mother thinks we should consider upgrading the Nantucket house this summer," Marcus announced while loosening his tie with the mechanical precision of someone delivering information rather than proposing discussion. "The kitchen renovation she has been planning would add significant value to the property, but the initial investment is substantial enough that we would need to adjust our savings timeline for the next 18 months. The casual assumption that major financial decisions affecting our household budget could be made without my consultation had become so routine that I barely registered the exclusion from planning processes that would impact resources I was actually providing. More troubling was Marcus's unconscious adoption of his mother's perspective that my input on significant expenditure decisions was unnecessary because my financial contributions were presumed to be negligible compared to his earning capacity and family resources. "What kind of investment are we discussing?" I asked while reviewing quarterly client reports that required completion before the following morning's presentation meetings. The question was posed with the same tone I might use for inquiring about grocery shopping priorities, disguising genuine interest in understanding the financial implications of renovation projects I had not been consulted about planning. Marcus settled into his favorite armchair with the comfortable assumption that detailed explanation would be appreciated, rather than recognition that comprehensive financial discussion should have preceded any preliminary planning conversations with his mother. The contractor estimates indicate approximately $80,000 for complete kitchen modernization with premium appliance packages and custom cabinetry that would bring the property in line with comparable Nantucket renovations Eleanor has researched. The amount itself was insignificant relative to my actual financial capacity, representing less than 0.1% of my total assets under management. However, the presumption that such substantial household expenditures could be planned and committed to without my participation in decision-making processes revealed fundamental problems with how Marcus understood our partnership dynamics and financial responsibilities. Have you discussed timeline expectations and contractor coordination with Eleanor? Or would this be something we should review together before making commitments? The question was designed to determine whether Marcus viewed this as family project requiring our joint participation or Morrison family initiative, where my role was limited to providing funding without meaningful input on planning or execution decisions. His response eliminated any ambiguity about how our relationship had evolved over 12 years of my strategic accommodation to family expectations and social pressures. Mother has been coordinating with the contractor directly since she has more experience managing renovation projects of this scope. Our role is primarily ensuring adequate funding availability and working around Eleanor's preferred timeline for completion before next summer's social season. The casual reference to our role as funding providers rather than decision-making participants crystallized years of gradual marginalization that had occurred so incrementally that I had failed to recognize the systematic erosion of my agency within our marriage. Marcus no longer viewed me as equal partner, whose preferences and expertise deserved consideration in major financial planning decisions. I had become supporting character in Morrison family narratives, where my function was limited to resource provision and grateful accommodation of their strategic preferences. The recognition was particularly disturbing because it revealed that my wealth concealment strategies had created unintended consequences that extended beyond social dynamics into fundamental relationship structures. By maintaining the appearance of modest financial capacity, I had inadvertently reinforced Marcus's assumptions about appropriate division of decision-making authority within our marriage. The practical result was systematic exclusion from planning processes that affected my actual resources, while being held responsible for funding decisions I had no meaningful role in developing. The pattern extended far beyond renovation projects into comprehensive lifestyle planning that reflected Morrison family preferences rather than genuine partnership between Marcus and myself. Vacation destinations were selected according to Eleanor's recommendations about appropriate venues for family social activities. Investment strategies for our joint accounts followed approaches that Marcus's father endorsed through decades of conservative wealth preservation, rather than the sophisticated growth strategies that had proven successful for my personal portfolio management. Social calendar coordination occurred primarily through Eleanor's network of established Boston families, whose approval was considered essential for Marcus's professional advancement within the investment banking community. My preferences for cultural events, professional networking opportunities, or social activities that might expand our relationships beyond traditional New England social hierarchies were consistently subordinated to Morrison family priorities and reputation management concerns. The cumulative effect had been transformation of our marriage, from authentic partnership into performance venue, where I played supporting role in Morrison family narratives, while my actual capabilities and preferences remained invisible to everyone, including my husband. The woman who managed $84 million in global investment portfolios was treated as junior partner, whose insights were limited to basic household budgeting and routine administrative support for more important decision-makers. The professional implications were equally problematic, because Marcus's dismissive attitude toward my expertise had begun affecting his own career performance in ways that reflected poorly on his analytical capabilities and strategic thinking skills. His discussions about complex client relationships and deal structures often revealed fundamental misunderstandings about market dynamics and risk assessment frameworks that I could have corrected easily if my input had been solicited and valued appropriately. The most recent example had involved his analysis of technology sector acquisition opportunities, where his evaluation criteria had overlooked critical regulatory considerations and competitive positioning factors that would significantly impact valuation assumptions and integration risks. The client presentation he had developed contained several factual errors about market conditions and growth projections that demonstrated insufficient research and analysis preparation. My attempts to provide subtle guidance through casual conversation had been dismissed as amateur speculation, rather than recognized as professional expertise that could enhance his strategic recommendations and client relationship management. The irony was particularly sharp because the portfolio management skills I employed for my own investment activities included comprehensive analysis of exactly the types of transactions Marcus struggled to evaluate competently within his banking responsibilities. The dynamic had created frustrating situations where I watched Marcus make preventable mistakes that damaged his professional reputation while being unable to provide assistance that could improve his performance outcomes. His pride in maintaining independence from my supposedly limited business knowledge prevented him from accessing analytical capabilities that could have substantially advanced his career development and client relationship success. The broader family dynamics reflected similar patterns of systematic underestimation that had become entrenched through years of accommodation and strategic patience. Eleanor's comments about my intellectual limitations and cultural inadequacies were no longer delivered with the careful diplomacy that had characterized early years of our relationship. Her certainty about my inferiority had evolved into casual dismissiveness that she felt no need to disguise or moderate for social appropriateness. Recent family gatherings had included increasingly direct observations about my intellectual shortcomings and social awkwardness that Marcus accepted without challenge or defense of my capabilities. Eleanor's pronouncements about how fortunate I was to have married into a family that valued education and achievement were met with his nodding agreement rather than recognition that such comments were inappropriate and fundamentally inaccurate assessments of my background and accomplishments. The erosion of respect within family contexts had begun affecting our private relationship dynamics, as Marcus increasingly adopted his mother's perspective about appropriate role boundaries and contribution expectations. Conversations that had once included genuine intellectual exchange and mutual consultation about complex decisions had devolved into monologues where Marcus processed his concerns while I provided supportive responses and practical suggestions that he might or might not consider implementing. The transformation was particularly evident during his discussions about professional challenges and career advancement strategies, where my questions and observations were received as well-intentioned but ultimately irrelevant input from someone whose business experience was limited to routine accounting functions. The sophisticated understanding of financial markets, strategic planning principles, and client relationship management that I applied daily in my actual professional activities remained invisible to the person who should have been most familiar with my capabilities. The psychological costs of maintaining this elaborate deception while watching our relationship deteriorate had become increasingly difficult to manage through compartmentalization strategies and long-term strategic thinking. Each dismissive comment, each exclusion from meaningful decision-making processes, and each assumption about my limitations represented evidence that the protective benefits of wealth concealment had been overwhelmed by the relational damage caused by systematic underestimation and marginalization. The recognition that Marcus had fundamentally lost respect for my intelligence and capabilities represented failure of the relationship preservation objectives that had motivated years of careful image management and strategic patience. The marriage I had been attempting to protect through wealth concealment had been destroyed by the very strategies I had employed to maintain it, creating an ironic situation where success in operational security had produced failure in primary mission objectives. The professional relationships that provided counterbalance to family diminishment had become increasingly important as sources of intellectual stimulation and recognition of actual capabilities. Investment conference presentations where my market analysis and strategic insights were valued by sophisticated financial professionals offered stark contrast to domestic contexts, where identical expertise was dismissed as amateur speculation unworthy of serious consideration. The disparity between professional recognition and personal marginalization had reached unsustainable levels where continuing the deception required accepting permanent subordination within my own marriage to preserve relationships that no longer reflected authentic partnership or mutual respect. The strategic calculation that had originally supported wealth concealment as necessary protection against potential exploitation had been rendered obsolete by systematic degradation of relationship foundations that concealment was supposed to preserve. The evening's conversation about Nantucket renovation projects had crystallized recognition that 12 years of strategic accommodation had created relationship dynamics that could not be corrected through continued patience and diplomatic engagement. Marcus's comfortable assumption that significant financial decisions could be made without my consultation represented fundamental shift in our partnership structure that reflected his complete adoption of Morrison family perspectives about my role and worth. The transformation had occurred gradually enough that individual incidents could be rationalized as temporary stress responses or isolated examples of thoughtlessness, rather than systematic pattern of diminishing respect and increasing marginalization. However, the cumulative evidence revealed comprehensive relationship deterioration that had progressed beyond repair through conventional communication strategies and mutual adjustment processes. The decision-making authority that I had surrendered incrementally through strategic accommodation could not be recovered without fundamental restructuring of relationship dynamics that would require disclosure of information I had been concealing for over a decade. The revelation that my actual financial capacity exceeded Marcus's family resources by substantial margins would necessarily destroy the comfortable assumptions that had enabled their condescending treatment, while forcing recognition of capabilities they had systematically dismissed and undervalued. The recognition represented critical inflection point where strategic objectives required comprehensive reevaluation based on accurate assessment of current conditions, rather than continued commitment to plans developed under circumstances that no longer existed. Christopher's participation in family gatherings consistently included pointed references to the intellectual demands of his consulting work compared to the routine administrative functions that he assumed characterized my professional responsibilities. His observations about complex analytical frameworks and sophisticated client relationship management were delivered with obvious intention to highlight the gap between his advanced capabilities and my presumed limitations in strategic thinking and business development. The performance served dual purposes of reinforcing family hierarchies while providing Marcus with alternative model for professional success that emphasized prestigious firm affiliation and social network advantages, rather than individual analytical capabilities or innovative strategic thinking. Christopher's consistent advancement within established consulting frameworks validated family assumptions about the importance of appropriate educational backgrounds and social connections for achieving meaningful career development and financial success. Marcus's sister, Amanda Morrison Blackwell, contributed her own specialized expertise in cultural superiority through detailed knowledge of appropriate social protocols, aesthetic preferences, and lifestyle choices that distinguished genuinely sophisticated individuals from those attempting to project refinement beyond their natural social position. Her role as board member for several prominent Boston charitable organizations provided apparent authority for evaluating cultural competence and social appropriateness according to established elite standards. Amanda's assessments of my clothing choices, home decoration preferences, and entertainment selections were presented as helpful guidance rather than systematic criticism designed to reinforce my outsider status within family social circles. Her recommendations about appropriate venues for social events, suitable gifts for various occasions, and acceptable conversation topics during formal gatherings served as ongoing education in elite behavioral expectations, while simultaneously highlighting my deficiencies in natural sophistication and cultural understanding. The educational process reinforced family narratives about my good fortune in gaining access to social environments and cultural experiences that would have remained unavailable without Morrison family sponsorship and guidance. Amanda's patient instruction in appropriate etiquette and aesthetic judgment was framed as generous investment in my social development, rather than systematic indoctrination designed to establish permanent subordination within family hierarchy structures. Harold Morrison, as family patriarch, provided ultimate validation for hierarchical arrangements through his apparent indifference to my presence and contributions during family interactions. His professional success as founder of Morrison Investment Partners established credible authority for financial and business judgments that consistently favored family members while dismissing external perspectives as inadequately informed or strategically naive. Harold's participation in family discussions about investment strategies, business opportunities, and economic trends excluded my input while soliciting enthusiastic agreement from Marcus and Christopher about analytical frameworks and strategic approaches that often contained significant blind spots or factual inaccuracies. The exclusion was managed through subtle conversational techniques that redirected attention away from any attempts I made to contribute relevant observations or alternative perspectives. The most sophisticated aspect of Harold's authority involved his ability to establish legitimacy for family financial decisions and lifestyle choices through apparent expertise and successful track record, rather than transparent evaluation of actual performance outcomes or strategic effectiveness. His investment philosophy and business development strategies served as unquestionable standards for family financial planning decisions, regardless of their actual effectiveness, compared to alternative approaches that might have generated superior results. The reinforcement mechanisms extended beyond immediate family members to include their established social networks and professional relationships, that provided external validation for Morrison family perspectives about appropriate social hierarchies and acceptable relationship patterns. Friends and colleagues who shared similar backgrounds and worldviews offered consistent support for family attitudes toward individuals who lacked proper credentials or social positioning. The marriage preservation goals that had motivated wealth concealment strategies had been undermined by the psychological and relational costs of maintaining deception that enabled systematic disrespect and marginalization. The choice between continuing elaborate performance that supported others, comfortable illusions about my limitations, versus revealing authentic capabilities that would force recognition of my actual worth, had become an unavoidable decision point that would determine whether recovery of genuine partnership remained possible, or whether relationship dissolution represented the only viable path toward restoration of appropriate respect and recognition. The moment of reckoning that had been approaching for months was finally arriving, requiring courage to prioritize authentic self-expression over strategic concealment that had outlived its protective value, and become obstacle to achievement of fundamental personal and professional objectives that required recognition of actual capabilities rather than performance of convenient fiction. The Morrison family ecosystem had evolved over 13 years into a sophisticated reinforcement mechanism that validated and perpetuated their collective assumptions about my intellectual limitations and social inadequacies. Each family member played a distinct role in maintaining the hierarchical structure that positioned me as grateful beneficiary of their tolerance, rather than equal participant in family relationships. The dynamics operated with such seamless coordination that interventions by any single individual would have required challenging the entire system of beliefs and behaviors that sustained their comfortable sense of superiority. Eleanor Morrison occupied the central position within this network, functioning as primary architect of family narratives and behavioral expectations that governed interactions with outsiders deemed inferior to established Morrison standards. Her role extended beyond typical mother-in-law authority into comprehensive social engineering that shaped how each family member understood their relationships with individuals who lacked appropriate breeding, education, or financial resources. The systematic nature of her influence revealed sophisticated understanding of group psychology and social control mechanisms that maintained family cohesion through shared identification with elite status and corresponding rejection of perceived inferiors. The foundation of Eleanor's authority rested upon decades of successful social positioning within Boston's established wealthy families, where reputation management and strategic alliance building required careful attention to appropriate relationship boundaries and acceptable association patterns. Her marriage to Harold Morrison had elevated her from comfortable upper-middle-class backgrounds into genuine high society circles, where maintaining position required constant vigilance against contamination by individuals whose presence might compromise carefully cultivated social standing in professional relationships. Eleanor's assessment of my suitability as daughter-in-law had been conducted according to criteria that emphasized family heritage, educational credentials from appropriate institutions, and social connections that would enhance rather than diminish Morrison family reputation within their established networks. My failure to meet these standards had positioned me as an ongoing threat to family standing that required careful management through strategic containment and systematic minimization of my influence on family decisions and public representations. The techniques Eleanor employed for maintaining control over family narratives included regular reinforcement of my limitations through casual observations about intellectual inadequacies, cultural deficiencies, and social awkwardness that required constant accommodation by more sophisticated family members. Her comments were calibrated to establish clear hierarchies without creating overt conflict that might force Marcus to choose between family loyalty and marital partnership. The strategic ambiguity allowed family members to participate in marginalization processes while maintaining plausible deniability about deliberate cruelty or systematic exclusion. Marcus's brother, Christopher Morrison, served as enthusiastic supporter of family superiority narratives, while adding particular expertise in financial services mockery that positioned my accounting career as evidence of intellectual limitations rather than professional competence. His role as senior associate at a prestigious consulting firm provided apparent authority for dismissing my business insights and strategic observations as amateur speculation unworthy of serious consideration by individuals with genuine expertise in corporate finance and strategic planning. Social gatherings that included Morrison family friends created multiple opportunities for subtle reinforcement of my peripheral status through conversation patterns that emphasized shared experiences and cultural references, that excluded outsiders while demonstrating insider knowledge and appropriate social positioning. The interactions operated according to sophisticated protocols that maintained surface politeness while establishing clear boundaries about genuine acceptance and equal participation in meaningful social exchanges. Professional networks within Boston's financial services community provided additional validation for family assumptions about competence hierarchies and appropriate career progression patterns that favored individuals with established social advantages over those attempting to achieve success through individual capability and strategic thinking. The circular reinforcement created echo chambers where Morrison family perspectives about merit and achievement received consistent confirmation from similarly positioned peers. The most damaging aspect of these supporting character dynamics involved their impact on Marcus's perception of our relationship and his understanding of appropriate partnership expectations within marriage. The constant reinforcement of family perspectives about my limitations and their superiority gradually eroded his respect for my intelligence and capabilities, while increasing his alignment with family narratives about his good fortune in achieving professional success, despite his romantic attachment to someone beneath his social and intellectual station. The transformation occurred gradually enough that individual incidents could be rationalized as isolated examples of family loyalty or professional networking, rather than systematic indoctrination designed to undermine our marriage relationship. However, the cumulative effect involved comprehensive restructuring of Marcus's understanding about appropriate role distributions within our partnership and acceptable boundaries for my participation in significant decision-making processes. The family influence operated through sophisticated psychological techniques that presented their perspectives as objective observations about reality, rather than biased assessments designed to maintain their privileged position within existing social hierarchies. The apparent reasonableness of their evaluations made resistance appear defensive or emotionally driven rather than legitimate challenge to factual inaccuracies and strategic misconceptions. The professional coaching that Marcus received from family members about career advancement strategies and client relationship management consistently emphasized approaches that reflected their understanding of business success, while dismissing alternative methods that might have proven more effective for his particular circumstances and capabilities. The guidance provided apparent expertise and family support, while actually limiting his strategic options and preventing development of more sophisticated analytical capabilities. The social coaching extended beyond professional contexts into comprehensive lifestyle guidance that shaped his preferences about appropriate entertainment choices, acceptable social relationships, and suitable long-term goals for family development and financial planning. The influence created alignment between Marcus's personal objectives and family expectations, while gradually eliminating consideration of alternative approaches that might have better served our mutual interests and individual development goals. The network effects of supporting character dynamics created self-reinforcing feedback loops that strengthened family cohesion, while systematically excluding perspectives that might have challenged their assumptions or introduced uncomfortable recognition of their limitations and blind spots. The system operated with impressive efficiency to maintain comfortable illusions about their superiority, while preventing exposure to evidence that might have required reconsideration of fundamental beliefs about merit, achievement, and appropriate social relationships. The recognition that I was confronting not merely individual prejudices but comprehensive social system designed to maintain existing power structures through systematic exclusion and marginalization represented crucial understanding for developing effective strategies to challenge their assumptions and assert appropriate recognition of my actual capabilities and contributions. The supporting character dynamics that had enabled years of condescending treatment would require systematic disruption rather than diplomatic engagement or gradual education approaches. The family ecosystem that had sustained their collective sense of superiority through my diminishment would necessarily resist individual attempts at boundary establishment or respect assertion, because such changes would threaten the fundamental narratives that justified their privileged position and comfortable assumptions about their exceptional capabilities and social standing, The comprehensive nature of their resistance would require equally comprehensive response that addressed systemic dynamics rather than individual behavioral modifications. The upcoming revelation of my actual financial status would necessarily disrupt every aspect of their carefully maintained hierarchy by demonstrating that their fundamental assumptions about capability, achievement, and social worth had been completely incorrect throughout 13 years of family interactions. The supporting character network that had enabled systematic underestimation would be forced to confront evidence that challenged their entire understanding of merit-based success and appropriate social positioning within established elite communities. The incident that would serve as the first unmistakable warning about the unsustainability of my carefully maintained facade occurred during the Morrison family's annual Thanksgiving gathering at their Beacon Hill estate. The event had been orchestrated with Eleanor's typical attention to social positioning and family hierarchy, featuring an assemblage of Boston's established families whose attendance validated the Morrisons' continued relevance within the city's elite social networks. What should have been routine family celebration became instead a crystallizing moment, when the protective benefits of my wealth concealment strategy were overshadowed by the profound personal costs of accepting systematic diminishment. The evening began according to established protocols that I had navigated successfully for over a decade. Eleanor had positioned me at the extended family table rather than among the primary guests, a seating arrangement that reflected my peripheral status while maintaining surface propriety about inclusion in family celebrations. The placement served dual purposes of acknowledging my marriage to Marcus while ensuring that my presence would not interfere with important conversations between individuals whose opinions and relationships required careful cultivation and management. My assigned dinner companions included Harold's elderly sister Margaret, whose hearing difficulties limited conversational demands, and the teenage children of family friends whose social awkwardness matched my own supposed limitations in sophisticated company. The arrangement provided comfortable isolation that prevented any risk of my contributing substantive observations to discussions about market conditions, investment strategies, or business opportunities that were occurring at tables populated by individuals deemed capable of meaningful professional dialogue. The crisis emerged during the second course when Eleanor's longtime friend Patricia Whitman began discussing her daughter's recent appointment to the board of directors for a prominent technology company. Patricia's pride in her daughter's achievement was evident as she described the selection process that had recognized exceptional analytical capabilities and strategic thinking skills that distinguished her from other candidates seeking board positions within Boston's competitive corporate environment. The nomination process required comprehensive evaluation of candidates' track records in complex financial analysis and their ability to provide strategic guidance for technology sector investments. Patricia explained to the assembled guests who nodded approvingly at this validation of merit-based selection criteria. Sarah's background in emerging markets analysis and her experience with international portfolio management made her uniquely qualified for addressing the challenges facing companies operating in rapidly evolving global technology markets. The description of qualifications that had earned board appointment included specific expertise areas that matched my own professional capabilities with remarkable precision. International portfolio management, emerging markets analysis, and strategic guidance for technology investments represented core competencies that I had developed through years of sophisticated investment activities that had generated substantial returns across multiple market cycles and geographic regions. Eleanor's response to Patricia's maternal pride included gracious acknowledgement of Sarah's achievement, while subtly redirecting conversation toward her own family's professional accomplishments. How wonderful that Sarah has developed such specialized expertise. Christopher has been working on several technology sector acquisitions through his consulting firm, and Marcus has been advising clients on international investment strategies that require exactly that type of sophisticated analytical background. The casual appropriation of my actual expertise for her sons' professional credentials represented the type of social maneuvering that I had observed countless times without challenging directly. Eleanor's comfortable assumption that financial analysis and strategic planning capabilities were naturally associated with Morrison family members rather than outsiders demonstrated her fundamental misconceptions about the source and distribution of competence within our extended family network. However, Patricia's follow-up question created an unprecedented opportunity for direct engagement that would test whether my expertise could be acknowledged within family contexts, or whether the systematic exclusion would be maintained regardless of demonstrated capability. Marcus, I would be curious to hear your perspective on the regulatory challenges facing international technology investments. Sarah has been wrestling with compliance frameworks that seem to change faster than companies can adapt their operational strategies. The question addressed exactly the type of complex analytical challenge that I encountered regularly through my portfolio management activities. Regulatory compliance for international technology investments required comprehensive understanding of multiple jurisdictional frameworks, currency exposure management, and strategic positioning relative to evolving government policies that affected market access and operational flexibility. Marcus's response revealed immediately that his claimed expertise in international investment strategies was largely theoretical rather than based on practical experience with the sophisticated compliance challenges that Patricia was describing. His observations about regulatory frameworks reflected general knowledge that could be acquired through industry publications rather than deep understanding developed through direct management of affected investment positions. The regulatory environment is certainly complex, Marcus replied with the careful ambiguity that professionals employ when discussing topics beyond their actual expertise. Each jurisdiction presents unique challenges that require careful evaluation of risk factors and compliance requirements. We typically recommend comprehensive due diligence processes that address both current regulations and potential changes that could affect long-term investment performance. The response provided no specific insights about practical compliance strategies or innovative approaches to managing regulatory uncertainty in international technology markets. Patricia's expression suggested polite acknowledgement rather than recognition of genuine expertise that could provide valuable guidance for her daughter's board responsibilities. The moment that followed represented a critical decision point about whether to maintain my protective invisibility or provide substantive contribution that would demonstrate actual competence in areas where Marcus's knowledge was clearly limited. The choice carried significant strategic implications because revealing expertise would necessarily raise questions about the source of my knowledge, while potentially undermining the careful construction of modest capabilities that I had maintained throughout 13 years of family interactions. The decision to speak emerged from accumulated frustration with watching Marcus receive credit for expertise that I possessed, while being excluded from conversations where my insights could provide genuine value to individuals seeking practical guidance about complex professional challenges. The psychological cost of continued strategic silence had exceeded the protective benefits of maintaining cover identity that enabled systematic underestimation and marginalization. Patricia, if I may add a perspective. I began carefully, using the measured tone I employed for client presentations where credibility needed to be established quickly through demonstrated competence rather than inherited authority. One effective approach for managing regulatory uncertainty in international technology markets involves developing portfolio positions that provide natural hedging against jurisdictional risk through strategic diversification across complementary regulatory environments. The explanation that followed drew directly from my experience managing technology sector investments across 14 countries with varying regulatory frameworks and government stability profiles. The strategies I described had been tested through multiple market cycles and had proven effective for maintaining portfolio performance despite significant regulatory changes that had disrupted other investors, returns, and strategic positioning. For example, establishing positions in companies that operate across multiple Asian markets with different regulatory approaches to data privacy and intellectual property protection can provide natural insurance against policy changes in any single jurisdiction. The key is identifying firms whose business models create value from regulatory diversity rather than being constrained by compliance requirements that limit operational flexibility. The specific nature of my recommendations and the confidence with which I delivered technical analysis created immediate shift in conversational dynamics that extended beyond my interaction with Patricia to include broader attention from other dinner guests who had overheard the exchange. The substance of my observations demonstrated expertise that contradicted fundamental assumptions about my intellectual capabilities and professional background. Patricia's response indicated recognition of genuine competence that provided valuable insights for practical challenges her daughter was confronting in her board responsibilities. That is exactly the type of strategic framework Sarah has been discussing with her colleagues. The regulatory arbitrage opportunities you describe align perfectly with their emerging markets expansion strategy. The validation from someone outside the Morrison family network created uncomfortable tension within family hierarchies, that depended upon my continued intellectual invisibility. Eleanor's expression reflected calculation about how to manage the disruption while maintaining social composure that was essential for successful dinner party hosting and reputation preservation among important family friends. Marcus's discomfort was more immediate and personal, because my demonstrated expertise highlighted the limitations in his own knowledge while undermining his role as the financial professional within our marriage partnership. His inability to contribute meaningfully to the technical discussion that had emerged from my initial observations created awkward silence that revealed the gap between his claimed capabilities and actual competence in sophisticated international investment analysis. The conversation continued with Patricia asking follow-up questions about specific implementation strategies and risk management techniques that drew increasingly detailed responses about portfolio construction methodologies and performance measurement frameworks that I had developed through years of practical experience managing substantial international investment positions. Christopher Morrison's attempt to redirect attention back to family members involved interjection, designed to minimize the significance of my contributions while reasserting Morrison family authority over financial discussions. Victoria has always been interested in investment topics, though of course the theoretical frameworks are quite different from practical application in institutional contexts where fiduciary responsibilities and regulatory oversight create additional complexity. The dismissive characterization of my expertise as amateur interest rather than professional competence represented typical family strategy for containing threats to established hierarchies while maintaining surface politeness that preserved social relationships with important external parties. However, Patricia's continued engagement with my observations suggested that the substance of my analysis had been recognized as valuable, despite Christopher's attempts at minimization. The evening concluded with several dinner guests approaching me individually to continue discussions about investment strategies and market analysis that had been initiated during the formal dinner conversation. The interactions provided validation that my expertise was recognized and valued by sophisticated financial professionals who were not constrained by Morrison family narratives about my intellectual limitations. However, the family's response to this breach of established protocols was immediate and comprehensive. Marcus's conversation with me during the drive home revealed his anger about what he characterized as inappropriate, attention-seeking behavior that had embarrassed him in front of family, friends, and professional contacts, whose respect was essential for his career advancement. "Victoria, I do not understand what you were trying to accomplish tonight," Marcus said with controlled frustration that indicated deeper concerns about my violation of established role boundaries. "Your comments about international investment strategies created awkward situations for Christopher and me because you were speaking beyond your actual area of expertise. The characterization of my professional competence as overreach beyond appropriate boundaries revealed how thoroughly Marcus had internalized his family's perspective about my intellectual limitations. His concern about embarrassment reflected primarily worry that my contributions had highlighted gaps in his own knowledge, rather than recognition that my insights had provided genuine value to dinner guests, seeking practical guidance about complex professional challenges. The warning that this incident represented extended beyond immediate family dynamics into fundamental question about sustainability of wealth concealment strategies that had created unintended consequences more damaging than the risks they had been designed to prevent. The protective invisibility that had enabled systematic underestimation had reached threshold where continued acceptance would require permanent subordination of my authentic capabilities and professional identity. The recognition that my expertise could not be acknowledged within family contexts, regardless of its demonstrated value, marked critical inflection point, where strategic objectives required comprehensive reevaluation. The relationship preservation goals that had motivated years of careful image management had been compromised by the psychological costs of accepting systematic diminishment that prevented recognition of actual capabilities and contributions. The choice between continued performance of intellectual limitations versus authentic expression of professional competence had become an unavoidable decision that would determine whether recovery of genuine partnership remained possible, or whether fundamental relationship restructuring had become necessary for restoration of appropriate respect and recognition of my actual worth and capabilities. The weeks following the Thanksgiving dinner incident revealed the true depth of the systemic problems that had developed within my marriage, while I remained focused on operational security and wealth preservation strategies. Marcus's response to my momentary display of expertise had triggered a series of escalating conflicts that exposed fundamental incompatibilities in our relationship structure that could no longer be managed through diplomatic accommodation and strategic patience. The complications multiplied with mathematical precision, as each attempt to restore equilibrium created additional tensions that required increasingly sophisticated damage control measures. The immediate consequence involved Marcus's systematic campaign to reassert authority within our marriage partnership through careful undermining of my credibility and strategic marginalization from financial decision-making processes that had previously included at least nominal consultation. His approach reflected sophisticated understanding of psychological manipulation techniques that maintained surface appearance of respectful partnership while systematically eroding my agency and influence over decisions affecting our shared resources and long-term objectives. The first manifestation occurred during our monthly financial planning review, a routine that had been established early in our marriage to coordinate budget allocations and investment strategies for our joint accounts. The meetings had typically involved collaborative discussion of spending priorities and savings objectives that reflected mutual input and shared decision-making authority. Despite my careful concealment of the sophisticated analytical frameworks that informed my recommendations and strategic preferences, Marcus arrived at our December planning session with prepared agenda and supporting documentation that suggested comprehensive revision of our financial management approach, based on what he characterized as improved strategic thinking and enhanced analytical capabilities developed through his professional advancement and family consultation processes. The presentation included detailed spreadsheets and projection models that demonstrated significant time investment in preparation activities that had occurred without my knowledge or participation. Victoria, I have been reviewing our financial planning approach with Christopher and my father, and we have identified several areas where more sophisticated strategies could improve our long-term performance outcomes. Marcus announced while distributing printed materials that reflected extensive collaboration with family members whose input had never been solicited during previous planning discussions. The consensus recommendation involves restructuring our investment allocation and spending priorities according to proven methodologies that have generated superior results for other families with similar objectives and resource profiles. Quote, "The casual reference to family consultation about our private financial planning represented unprecedented violation of the partnership boundaries that had governed our marriage relationship since its inception. The decision to seek external advice about intimate financial decisions without my participation or consent revealed fundamental shift in Marcus's understanding of appropriate authority distribution within our marriage and his comfort level with subordinating our joint interests to Morrison family preferences and strategic objectives." The specific recommendations that emerged from this family consultation process reflected investment philosophies and risk management approaches that contradicted established principles I had employed successfully for portfolio management activities that Marcus remained unaware of conducting. The strategies they endorsed emphasized conservative asset allocation frameworks and traditional investment vehicles that would have generated substantially lower returns than the sophisticated diversification and emerging market positioning strategies that had enabled my wealth accumulation over the preceding 12 years. The proposed revisions include transition toward more conservative equity positioning with increased allocation to municipal bonds and blue-chip dividend stocks that provide stable income streams while preserving capital during market volatility. Marcus continued, reading directly from prepared materials that reflected Morrison family investment philosophy rather than independent analysis of market conditions and growth opportunities. This approach aligns with proven strategies that have enabled other established Boston families to preserve wealth across multiple generations while maintaining appropriate risk management and liquidity provisions. The fundamental flaw in this recommended approach involved its assumption that our financial objectives centered on wealth preservation rather than continued growth and strategic positioning for emerging market opportunities that required more sophisticated analytical capabilities and risk tolerance than conservative approaches could accommodate. The Morrison family's investment philosophy reflected their inherited wealth background where capital preservation took precedence over growth maximization. But this framework was inappropriate for our circumstances where active wealth building remained the primary objective. My attempt to provide alternative perspective that might improve their strategic recommendations was immediately dismissed through systematic marginalization techniques that maintained surface politeness while eliminating my influence over the final decision-making process. Marcus's response to my observations about growth opportunities and risk assessment frameworks revealed his complete adoption of family attitudes about my intellectual limitations, an inappropriate presumption in offering opinions about complex financial strategies. I appreciate your interest in these planning decisions, Victoria, but the analytical frameworks involved require sophisticated understanding of institutional investment methodologies and market dynamics that extend beyond routine accounting practices. Marcus replied with condescending tone that he had never employed during our early marriage years, when genuine partnership had characterized our financial planning discussions. Christopher spent considerable time explaining the risk management principles and portfolio construction techniques that inform these recommendations, and their family has been implementing these strategies successfully for several decades. The dismissive characterization of my expertise as amateur interest rather than professional competence represented direct adoption of Christopher's earlier strategy for marginalizing my contributions during family gatherings. Marcus's comfortable assumption that Morrison family investment experience provided superior guidance compared to my actual capabilities revealed how thoroughly his respect for my intelligence and analytical skills had been eroded through systematic family influence and reinforcement of hierarchical assumptions. The broader implications extended beyond immediate financial planning decisions into comprehensive restructuring of our marriage relationship, according to patterns that reflected Morrison family expectations about appropriate authority distribution and decision-making processes. The collaborative partnership that had characterized our early years together had been systematically replaced by hierarchical arrangement, where Marcus occupied the primary decision-making position, while my role was limited to implementation support and grateful acknowledgement of his strategic leadership. The transformation had occurred gradually enough that individual changes could be rationalized as temporary adjustments or natural evolution of our partnership as professional responsibilities and family relationships matured. However, the cumulative effect involved fundamental alteration of our marriage structure that eliminated my agency and influence while increasing Marcus's alignment with family perspectives that positioned me as fortunate beneficiary of Morrison generosity rather than equal partner whose contributions and preferences deserved appropriate recognition and consideration. The financial planning conflict represented merely the most visible manifestation of deeper relationship problems that had been developing across multiple domains of our shared life. Social calendar management had been gradually transferred to Eleanor's coordination and approval, with Marcus accepting family recommendations about appropriate events, suitable social contacts, and acceptable entertainment choices without consulting my preferences or scheduling constraints that might conflict with family priorities. Professional development opportunities that might enhance my credentials or expand my network relationships were systematically discouraged through scheduling conflicts with family obligations and subtle pressure to prioritize domestic responsibilities over external activities that might create competing loyalties or alternative sources of validation and recognition. Marcus's increasing comfort with these restrictions revealed his adoption of family assumptions about appropriate role boundaries for wives within their social circle. The most damaging complications involved Marcus's growing willingness to disparage my intelligence and capabilities during conversations with friends and colleagues, where establishing his superiority required diminishing my competence and achievements. His casual references to my intellectual limitations and professional inadequacies served strategic functions within social contexts, where demonstrating appropriate partner selection enhanced his reputation and social standing among peers who shared similar attitudes about status hierarchies and marriage dynamics. These public diminishment strategies created self-reinforcing cycles, where Marcus's credibility within professional and social networks became partially dependent on maintaining narratives about my inferiority that justified his position within established hierarchies, while explaining his romantic attachment to someone apparently beneath his intellectual and social station. The psychological investment in these narratives created resistance to evidence that might contradict fundamental assumptions about our relative capabilities and worth. The crisis deepened when Marcus began soliciting family intervention for what he characterized as my increasingly inappropriate behavior and unrealistic expectations about participation in decision-making processes that required expertise beyond my educational background and professional experience. His requests for support in managing my presumed emotional instability and social awkwardness created alliance structures that isolated me within family contexts, while positioning Morrison family members as reasonable authorities whose guidance was necessary for maintaining marriage stability. Eleanor's response to Marcus's appeals for assistance included systematic expansion of her influence over our household management and lifestyle choices through what she presented as temporary support during our adjustment period, but which rapidly became permanent arrangements that eliminated my authority over domestic decisions and social planning. Her involvement extended from holiday coordination and gift selection into comprehensive oversight of our entertainment choices, home decoration decisions, and even clothing purchases that might affect family reputation and social positioning. The coordination between Marcus and his family in managing what they perceived as my problematic behavior represented sophisticated manipulation strategy that maintained appearance of concern for our marriage welfare, while actually serving interests of family control and status preservation that required my continued subordination and marginalization. The interventions were presented as necessary measures for protecting our relationship stability, rather than systematic elimination of my agency and authentic self-expression within the marriage partnership. Christopher's contribution to this intervention process involved professional consultation about appropriate boundaries for wives of ambitious financial professionals who required supportive home environments and social relationships that enhanced rather than complicated their career advancement objectives. His expertise in managing professional image and client relationships provided apparent authority for recommendations about my behavior modification and role adjustment that aligned with Morrison family expectations about proper marriage dynamics. Amanda's participation included cultural education about appropriate social behavior and aesthetic choices that would enable me to fulfill my responsibilities as Morrison family representative without creating embarrassment or complications for family reputation management within Boston's established social networks. Her guidance was presented as generous investment in my social development, rather than systematic indoctrination designed to eliminate authentic self-expression and independent decision-making capabilities. The family coordination revealed sophisticated understanding of group psychology and social control mechanisms that could reshape individual identity and behavioral patterns through sustained pressure and systematic reinforcement of desired characteristics, while eliminating traits that threatened established power structures and comfortable assumptions about capability hierarchies and social positioning. The most troubling aspect involved Marcus's apparent satisfaction with these intervention outcomes and his growing comfort with family arrangements that positioned him as primary authority figure within our marriage, while reducing my role to supportive functions that enhanced his professional advancement and social standing without requiring recognition of my actual capabilities or consideration of my preferences and objectives. The recognition that I was confronting not merely individual relationship problems but comprehensive system designed to maintain my subordination through psychological manipulation and systematic marginalization represented crucial understanding that would inform strategic planning for addressing these complications through methods that could not be managed, negotiated, or diplomatically resolved within existing relationship frameworks that had been structured specifically to prevent my authentic expression and appropriate recognition. The deepening complications had reached threshold where continued accommodation would require permanent acceptance of inferior status within my own marriage, complete elimination of professional identity and intellectual engagement, and systematic suppression of capabilities and achievements that represented core aspects of my authentic self-expression and personal fulfillment that could not be sacrificed for relationship preservation objectives that no longer served my fundamental interests and long-term welfare. The moment that would shatter my remaining illusions about the possibility of preserving our marriage through continued accommodation arrived on a frigid February evening, when Marcus returned from what he had described as a routine client dinner. The conversation that followed would eliminate any remaining ambiguity about how fundamentally our relationship had deteriorated and how completely Marcus had embraced his family's perspective about my intellectual inferiority and social inadequacy. The revelation would force me to confront the undeniable reality that 13 years of strategic patience and diplomatic engagement had produced outcomes directly opposite to my intended objectives. Marcus entered our Beacon Hill townhouse carrying himself with the particular satisfaction that accompanied successful professional networking events, where important relationships had been strengthened and career advancement opportunities had been identified and cultivated. His expression suggested the comfortable confidence of someone who had navigated complex social dynamics successfully while representing himself and his family background in ways that enhanced his reputation and strategic positioning within Boston's competitive financial services environment. The Harrison Group dinner exceeded my expectations for relationship building and strategic discussion, Marcus announced while settling into his preferred armchair with the apparent assumption that detailed reporting about his professional activities would be welcomed and appreciated rather than viewed as obligatory information sharing between marriage partners. The conversation included several senior partners from competing firms who were genuinely impressed with my analysis of emerging market opportunities and international regulatory frameworks. The reference to expertise in international regulatory frameworks immediately captured my attention, because this represented exactly the area where Marcus's knowledge remained largely theoretical despite his confident presentations during professional and social contexts. My portfolio management activities required sophisticated understanding of regulatory compliance across 14 jurisdictions, with varying government stability profiles and policy development trajectories that created both opportunities and risks for technology sector investments. What specific regulatory frameworks did you discuss? I asked with genuine curiosity about whether Marcus had developed new insights about international compliance strategies, or whether he had relied upon general knowledge and confident presentation skills to maintain credibility during conversations with experienced financial professionals, whose expertise might have exposed limitations in his actual understanding. Marcus's response revealed immediately that his claimed success during the evening had been achieved through presentation techniques that projected competence without demonstrating substantive knowledge about the complex analytical challenges that sophisticated international investment strategies required for effective implementation and risk management. The discussion focused primarily on the strategic implications of regulatory uncertainty rather than specific compliance procedures. Marcus replied with careful ambiguity that suggested limited familiarity with practical implementation details. The consensus among the senior partners involved emphasis on diversification strategies and prudent risk management rather than aggressive positioning in markets where regulatory changes could create unexpected challenges for client portfolio performance. The vague characterization of investment strategies as emphasizing diversification and prudent risk management provided no specific insights about innovative approaches to regulatory arbitrage or sophisticated techniques for managing compliance requirements, while maintaining growth-oriented positioning in high-potential emerging markets. The response suggested that Marcus had successfully navigated dinner conversation through general observations that demonstrated awareness of relevant issues without revealing the depth of his actual analytical capabilities. However, the conversation that followed would reveal that Marcus's professional networking success had been achieved through methods that involved systematic misrepresentation of his expertise and strategic appropriation of insights and analytical frameworks that he had acquired through our private discussions over the years of our marriage. The recognition that my husband had been exploiting our intimate conversations to enhance his professional reputation, while simultaneously diminishing my capabilities within family and social contexts, represented betrayal that eliminated any remaining possibility of trust reconstruction or partnership restoration. The most successful aspect of the evening involved my presentation of strategic insights about technology sector positioning and regulatory risk management that generated significant interest from multiple senior partners. Marcus continued with obvious satisfaction about professional recognition he had received. Several individuals specifically requested follow-up meetings to discuss potential collaboration opportunities and client relationship development that could substantially advance my career trajectory within the firm. The description of his presentation success triggered uncomfortable recognition that the strategic insights he had shared with potential collaboration partners likely included analytical frameworks and market observations that had emerged from our private conversations, where I had provided casual commentary about investment opportunities and risk assessment methodologies without realizing that Marcus was systematically cataloging my observations for professional. What types of strategic insights generated the most positive response? I asked with growing concern about whether Marcus had been appropriating my expertise for professional advancement, while maintaining public narratives about my intellectual limitations that served his strategic interests within family and social hierarchies. Marcus's detailed response confirmed my worst suspicions about the systematic nature of his professional deception and the extent to which our marriage relationship had been compromised by his willingness to exploit my knowledge while denying my capabilities. His presentation to the Harrison Group's senior partners had included specific analytical techniques and market positioning strategies that I had developed through years of practical experience managing international investment portfolios across multiple economic cycles and regulatory environments. The framework that generated the most enthusiasm involves strategic positioning across multiple Asian markets, with complementary regulatory approaches to intellectual property protection and data privacy requirements. Marcus explained with the confidence of someone claiming credit for original strategic thinking. The concept involves creating natural hedging against jurisdictional risk through portfolio construction that benefits from regulatory diversity rather than being constrained by compliance limitations. The strategic framework he described represented nearly verbatim repetition of the explanation I had provided to Patricia Whitman during the Thanksgiving dinner incident when I had briefly revealed my expertise in international technology investments. Marcus had been present during that conversation and had apparently memorized my analytical approach for subsequent professional use, without acknowledgement of the source or recognition of my intellectual contribution to his career advancement activities. The realization that Marcus had been systematically stealing my expertise for professional gain, while simultaneously working to undermine my credibility within our marriage and family relationships, represented comprehensive betrayal that eliminated any remaining foundation for trust or partnership restoration. His willingness to appropriate my knowledge while denying my capabilities revealed calculated exploitation that served his strategic interests while systematically diminishing my agency and authentic self-expression. Marcus, the framework you just described is identical to the analysis I provided during the Thanksgiving dinner conversation with Patricia Whitman. I stated with the calm precision I employed for addressing serious professional misconduct during client relationship management situations. Are you claiming credit for strategic insights that originated from my expertise and experience? The directness of my challenge appeared to surprise Marcus, because he had become accustomed to my diplomatic accommodation of his professional ambitions and family loyalty obligations, without direct confrontation about ethical boundaries or intellectual property concerns. His response revealed both defensive anger about being questioned and comfortable assumption that his appropriation of my expertise was justified by marriage relationship dynamics and appropriate authority distribution within our partnership. Victoria, those concepts are standard analytical frameworks that anyone with serious experience in international finance would understand and apply. Marcus replied with dismissive tone that attempted to minimize the significance of intellectual appropriation while maintaining his credibility as the source of innovative strategic thinking. Your interest in investment topics does not create ownership over general methodologies that are widely used throughout the financial services industry. The characterization of sophisticated analytical frameworks as general methodologies demonstrated Marcus's fundamental misunderstanding of the specialized expertise required for successful international portfolio management and his comfortable assumption that my contributions could be appropriated without recognition or compensation because marriage relationships provided unlimited access to intellectual property and professional insights without reciprocal obligations or acknowledgement requirements. However, the conversation that revealed the full extent of Marcus's professional deception and systematic exploitation involved his description of additional strategic recommendations that had impressed the Harrison Group partners during their discussion of emerging market opportunities and currency exposure management techniques. Each analytical framework he described represented specific methodologies I had developed through years of practical experience and sophisticated research that extended far beyond standard industry practices. The currency hedging strategies that generated particular interest involved dynamic positioning across multiple reserve currencies, with strategic emphasis on Asian financial markets where central bank policies create arbitrage opportunities for sophisticated investors. Marcus continued, apparently unaware that his detailed knowledge of these specialized techniques contradicted his earlier characterization of my expertise as amateur interest rather than professional competence. The currency hedging methodologies he described required comprehensive understanding of central bank policy coordination, international monetary system dynamics, and sophisticated mathematical modeling techniques that extended far beyond the analytical capabilities that Marcus had demonstrated during our private discussions about financial planning and investment strategy development. His confident presentation of these complex frameworks could only have been achieved through systematic appropriation of my expertise and strategic insights. The recognition that Marcus had been conducting comprehensive surveillance of my professional activities and intellectual capabilities, while maintaining public narratives about my intellectual limitations, represented psychological manipulation that eliminated any remaining possibility of marriage relationship restoration through improved communication or enhanced mutual understanding. His systematic exploitation revealed calculated deception that served strategic objectives while preventing authentic partnership development. The moment of absolute clarity arrived when Marcus described his plans for leveraging the professional relationships he had developed through appropriation of my expertise into long-term career advancement opportunities that would require continued access to sophisticated analytical capabilities that he did not actually possess independently. His comfortable assumption that my knowledge would remain available for ongoing exploitation while my recognition and agency were systematically eliminated revealed the true nature of how he understood our marriage relationship and partnership dynamics. The follow-up meetings with Harrison Group partners will require comprehensive strategic presentations about international investment methodologies and emerging market analysis that could establish my reputation as leading expert in sophisticated portfolio management techniques. Marcus explained with obvious excitement about professional opportunities that depended entirely upon continued appropriation of my intellectual capabilities. The potential for advancement within the firm could be transformational if these relationships develop according to current trajectory and strategic positioning. The comfortable assumption that I would continue providing sophisticated analytical support for his professional advancement while accepting systematic diminishment of my own capabilities and contributions represented the final confirmation that our marriage relationship had been irreparably damaged through systematic exploitation and psychological manipulation that could not be corrected through conventional communication strategies or diplomatic engagement processes. The moment of reckoning had arrived when continued accommodation would require permanent acceptance of intellectual slavery within my own marriage, complete subordination of professional identity and authentic self-expression, and systematic enabling of Marcus's career advancement through exploitation of capabilities he refused to acknowledge, while systematically working to prevent my own recognition and professional development. The choice between continued enablement of systematic exploitation versus authentic assertion of my actual capabilities and worth had become an unavoidable decision that would determine whether recovery of genuine partnership remained possible, or whether comprehensive relationship restructuring through legal proceedings had become necessary for restoration of appropriate recognition and protection of intellectual property rights that Marcus had been systematically violating. The undeniable evidence that transformation was necessary had been presented through Marcus's own description of his professional activities and strategic objectives that depended upon continued appropriation of my expertise, while maintaining narratives about my intellectual inferiority that served his positioning within family and professional hierarchies. The systematic nature of his deception and exploitation had eliminated any remaining possibility of trust reconstruction through improved communication or enhanced mutual understanding between marriage partners. The sleepless hours that followed Marcus's revelation about his systematic appropriation of my expertise became a strategic planning session that would determine the trajectory of my remaining years and establish whether authentic self-expression remained possible within the constraints of my current life structure. The decision-making process required comprehensive evaluation of relationship dynamics, professional consequences, and personal integrity considerations that extended far beyond conventional divorce planning into fundamental questions about identity reconstruction and strategic positioning for optimal long-term outcomes. The primary challenge involved developing implementation strategies that would achieve multiple objectives simultaneously while minimizing exposure to uncontrolled variables that could compromise desired results. The revelation of my actual financial status would necessarily destroy comfortable assumptions that had governed family relationships for 13 years, create significant disruption within established social networks, and require careful coordination with legal and financial professionals who specialized in complex asset protection during high-stakes divorce proceedings. However, the psychological preparation proved equally demanding because the decision to abandon 13 years of strategic concealment represented comprehensive rejection of identity management approaches that had provided security and predictability, despite their ultimate failure to preserve authentic partnership or genuine respect within marriage relationships. The choice required courage to embrace uncertainty about relationship outcomes, while prioritizing personal integrity over comfortable accommodation of systematic exploitation and intellectual appropriation. The strategic analysis began with realistic assessment of current relationship dynamics and their potential for improvement through conventional communication strategies, or enhanced mutual understanding between marriage partners, whose fundamental assumptions about capability hierarchies and appropriate authority distribution had been shaped by years of systematic reinforcement through family influence and professional validation within established social networks. Marcus's comfortable assumption that continued access to my expertise would be available for ongoing career advancement, while recognition of my capabilities remained systematically suppressed, revealed comprehensive misunderstanding of partnership principles and ethical boundaries that could not be corrected through diplomatic engagement or gradual education processes. His psychological investment in narratives about my intellectual inferiority had become essential for maintaining his position within family hierarchies and professional networks, where credibility depended partially upon appropriate partner selection and social positioning. The Morrison family's coordinated efforts to maintain my subordination through systematic marginalization and strategic intervention represented sophisticated manipulation system designed to preserve existing power structures while preventing recognition of capabilities that might challenge comfortable assumptions about merit-based achievement and appropriate social hierarchies. Their resistance to evidence about my actual competence would necessarily intensify if gradual revelation threatened established narratives that justified their superior positioning within family relationships and broader social contexts. The professional implications extended beyond immediate divorce considerations into long-term career development opportunities that had been systematically constrained through wealth concealment strategies that prevented appropriate recognition of analytical capabilities and strategic thinking skills that could command premium compensation and prestigious client relationships within institutional investment management environments. The decision to maintain invisible identity had sacrificed professional advancement opportunities that could have generated substantial additional wealth, while providing intellectual stimulation and peer recognition that marriage relationships had systematically denied. The financial analysis revealed that divorce proceedings would provide optimal framework for comprehensive asset disclosure that would be legally required, rather than voluntary revelation that might be interpreted as vindictive or manipulative behavior designed to achieve emotional satisfaction rather than practical objectives related to fair property division and appropriate recognition of individual contributions to marriage relationship outcomes and shared lifestyle maintenance activities. The timing considerations favored immediate action because continued delay would enable Marcus to strengthen professional relationships that depended upon appropriation of my expertise, while potentially creating additional complications through family intervention strategies designed to preserve existing relationship dynamics that served Morrison interests, rather than authentic partnership development between marriage partners with equal agency and decision-making authority. The legal consultation process began with comprehensive research into attorneys who specialized in high-net-worth divorce proceedings, with particular expertise in asset protection strategies and confidentiality management during proceedings that involved significant wealth disclosure and complex international investment portfolios that required sophisticated understanding of jurisdiction-specific regulations and tax implications for property division outcomes. The selection criteria emphasized demonstrated experience with clients whose circumstances involved systematic wealth concealment for legitimate privacy protection, rather than fraudulent tax avoidance or criminal asset hiding activities that could complicate legal proceedings, and create additional exposure to regulatory scrutiny or criminal investigation processes that would compromise strategic objectives for efficient resolution and optimal financial outcomes. Attorney Margaret Sullivan of Sullivan Hayes & Associates emerged as optimal choice based on her extensive experience managing complex international asset disclosure cases and her reputation for discretionary client service that prioritized confidentiality protection while achieving favorable settlements through comprehensive documentation and strategic negotiation, rather than adversarial litigation approaches that could create unnecessary publicity and relationship damage beyond minimum requirements for legal resolution. The initial consultation occurred at Attorney Sullivan's downtown Boston office, in a conference room designed for sensitive discussions about complex financial circumstances and strategic planning for high-stakes legal proceedings. Her professional demeanor combined genuine expertise with appropriate confidentiality protocols that created immediate confidence about her capability to manage sophisticated wealth disclosure, while achieving strategic objectives for fair property division and recognition of individual contributions to marriage relationship outcomes. Mrs. Chen, I understand that your circumstances involve significant asset concealment that has created complications within your marriage relationship and requires careful legal strategy for appropriate disclosure during divorce proceedings. Attorney Sullivan began with directness that eliminated unnecessary diplomatic preliminaries, while establishing clear understanding of the analytical framework required for effective representation. The comprehensive nature of wealth concealment you describe will require extensive documentation and strategic coordination with financial analysts who specialize in international portfolio valuation and tax optimization strategies. The professional validation of my circumstances as legitimate privacy protection rather than questionable financial behavior provided immediate confirmation that legal expertise was available for managing complex asset disclosure while achieving favorable outcomes through systematic preparation and strategic presentation or vindictive revelation designed primarily for psychological satisfaction. The documentation process required comprehensive compilation of investment records, trust fund statements, international banking relationships, and property valuations that would provide complete financial picture while maintaining appropriate confidentiality protocols throughout preparation and presentation phases of legal proceedings. The organizational requirements exceeded typical divorce documentation because international asset portfolios involved multiple jurisdictions with varying disclosure requirements and regulatory frameworks that affected both legal strategy and tax optimization opportunities. Attorney Sullivan's systematic approach to financial analysis included coordination with forensic accountants who specialized in complex wealth evaluation and tax professionals who understood international asset protection strategies and their implications for domestic legal proceedings and settlement negotiation processes. The professional team assembly provided comprehensive expertise while maintaining strict confidentiality protocols that protected sensitive information throughout legal preparation and strategic planning phases. The strategic planning sessions included detailed scenario analysis that evaluated potential responses from Marcus and the Morrison family to comprehensive wealth disclosure and its implications for existing relationship dynamics and family hierarchy structures that had operated according to assumptions about financial dependency and intellectual capabilities that would be completely contradicted by accurate asset revelation and professional competence demonstration. The psychological impact of substantial wealth disclosure on family members who have maintained systematic assumptions about financial dependency and intellectual capabilities will likely produce defensive responses that attempt to minimize significance of revelations while preserving existing narratives about capability hierarchies and appropriate authority distribution. Attorney Sullivan observed with professional understanding of social dynamics that complicated high-net-worth divorce proceedings. Strategic preparation should anticipate attempts to characterize wealth accumulation as fortunate inheritance rather than sophisticated investment management, and intellectual capabilities as amateur interest rather than professional expertise. The recognition that legal proceedings would necessarily involve comprehensive destruction of comfortable assumptions that had enabled systematic exploitation and marginalization provided psychological preparation for family responses that would attempt to preserve existing narratives through alternative explanations that minimized my strategic capabilities while maintaining Morrison family positioning within established. The decision point crystallized during the final strategic planning session when comprehensive evaluation of alternatives confirmed that divorce proceedings represented optimal pathway for achieving authentic recognition, appropriate respect, and fair compensation for years of intellectual contribution that had been systematically appropriated while my capabilities were publicly diminished through coordinated family manipulation and strategic marginalization. The choice between continued accommodation of exploitation versus authentic assertion of capabilities and worth had been resolved through systematic analysis that prioritized long-term integrity and professional development over short-term relationship preservation, that required permanent subordination and intellectual slavery within marriage partnership, that no longer reflected genuine mutuality or appropriate recognition of individual contributions and capabilities. The implementation timeline required immediate action to prevent additional professional advancement by Marcus through continued appropriation of my expertise, while legal preparation occurred according to accelerated schedule that would minimize opportunities for defensive responses or asset concealment strategies that could complicate fair property division and appropriate settlement negotiations. The psychological preparation involved development of emotional resilience strategies that would enable maintenance of professional composure during family confrontations and public revelation of wealth status that would necessarily destroy established assumptions while forcing recognition of capabilities that had been systematically denied and undervalued throughout 13 years of strategic accommodation and diplomatic engagement. The moment of commitment arrived when comprehensive strategic analysis confirmed that continued concealment would require permanent acceptance of intellectual exploitation and systematic marginalization that prevented authentic self-expression and appropriate professional development, while enabling Marcus's career advancement through appropriation of capabilities he refused to acknowledge or respect within marriage partnership contexts. The decision to proceed with divorce proceedings and comprehensive wealth disclosure represented fundamental transformation from strategic invisibility toward authentic self-expression that prioritized personal integrity and professional recognition over relationship preservation objectives that had been systematically undermined through exploitation and psychological manipulation that eliminated genuine partnership possibilities. The choice required courage to embrace uncertainty about social relationships and family dynamics, while prioritizing long-term fulfillment and authentic recognition over comfortable accommodation that had become unsustainable burden, requiring permanent subordination of intellectual capabilities and professional identity that represented core aspects of authentic self-expression and personal fulfillment. The strategic decision had been made through comprehensive analysis that confirmed divorce proceedings would provide optimal framework for achieving recognition, respect, and appropriate compensation, while establishing new foundation for relationships based on accurate understanding of capabilities and contributions, rather than comfortable assumptions about intellectual hierarchies and appropriate authority distribution that served others' interests while preventing authentic partnership development and mutual recognition between equals. The implementation of my transformation strategy commenced at precisely 6:30 on Monday morning, February 28, with the filing of divorce petition documents at Suffolk County Superior Court. The legal action represented the first concrete step toward dismantling 13 years of strategic concealment, while establishing official framework for comprehensive asset disclosure that would force recognition of financial capabilities that had remained invisible throughout my marriage. The systematic nature of the transformation process required meticulous coordination between legal, financial, and personal preparation activities that would reshape every aspect of my identity presentation and relationship dynamics. Attorney Sullivan had orchestrated the filing process to maximize strategic impact, while maintaining appropriate confidentiality protocols during initial petition stages. The documentation included preliminary asset disclosure statements that provided sufficient detail to establish the substantial nature of property division requirements, without revealing specific investment positions or portfolio construction strategies that required protection during negotiation phases of divorce proceedings. The legal framework established through initial petition filing created immediate shift in relationship dynamics that eliminated Marcus's comfortable assumption about continued access to my expertise, while maintaining existing patterns of intellectual appropriation and systematic marginalization. The formal nature of legal proceedings required acknowledgement of my agency and decision-making authority that had been systematically eroded through years of family influence and strategic manipulation designed to preserve Morrison family hierarchies. The psychological preparation for this transformation had included comprehensive development of emotional resilience strategies that would enable maintenance of professional composure during family confrontations and social situations, where revelation of my actual circumstances would necessarily destroy established assumptions about financial dependency and intellectual capabilities. The preparation process had involved extensive consultation with psychological advisors who specialized in identity transition management during complex life restructuring situations. The first challenge emerged within hours of petition filing when Marcus returned from his investment banking responsibilities to discover legal documentation that contradicted fundamental assumptions about our marriage relationship and my role within existing family structures. His response revealed the depth of psychological investment in narratives about my limitations that had become essential for maintaining his position within professional and social hierarchies, where credibility required appropriate partner selection and strategic relationship management. Victoria, what is the meaning of these legal documents, and why would you initiate divorce proceedings without discussion about our relationship concerns and potential solutions through enhanced communication or family consultation? Marcus demanded with combination of genuine shock and defensive anger that indicated his complete unpreparedness for systematic challenge to existing relationship arrangements that had served his professional advancement objectives. The directness of his confrontation provided immediate opportunity to establish new communication patterns based on authentic self-expression, rather than diplomatic accommodation of his assumptions about intellectual hierarchies and appropriate authority distribution within our marriage partnership. The response required careful balance between firm boundary establishment and professional composure that would support effective negotiation processes throughout divorce proceedings. Marcus, the decision to pursue divorce reflects comprehensive analysis of relationship dynamics that have become incompatible with authentic partnership and mutual respect. I replied with the measured tone I employed for complex client presentations, where credibility needed to be established through demonstrated competence rather than inherited authority. The systematic appropriation of my expertise for your professional advancement while my capabilities are publicly dismissed represents violation of partnership principles that cannot be resolved through conventional communication strategies. The specific reference to intellectual appropriation appeared to surprise Marcus because he had become accustomed to my strategic accommodation of his career development activities, without direct challenge to ethical boundaries or acknowledgement requirements that should have governed use of my professional insights and analytical capabilities. His response revealed both defensive anger about accountability expectations and comfortable assumption that marriage relationships provided unlimited access to intellectual property without reciprocal obligations. I do not understand what you mean by appropriation of expertise, Victoria. Investment analysis and strategic planning represent standard methodologies that anyone with serious financial education would understand and apply in professional contexts. Marcus replied with dismissive tone that attempted to minimize significance of intellectual contribution while maintaining credibility as independent source of sophisticated analytical capabilities. The characterization of specialized investment management techniques as standard methodologies demonstrated his fundamental misunderstanding of the expertise required for successful international portfolio management, while revealing comfortable assumption that my contributions could be claimed without recognition because marriage relationships eliminated individual ownership of intellectual property and professional insights. However, the transformation process required systematic documentation of intellectual appropriation patterns rather than immediate confrontation about specific incidents that could be rationalized or dismissed through strategic interpretation of professional development activities. The comprehensive nature of divorce proceedings would provide optimal framework for establishing factual record about expertise sources and strategic thinking capabilities that would eliminate ambiguity about individual contributions to professional achievements and career advancement outcomes. The second phase of transformation implementation involved comprehensive coordination with financial advisors and forensic accountants, who would provide detailed documentation of asset portfolios and investment management activities that had remained invisible throughout our marriage. The complexity of international asset positions required sophisticated valuation methodologies and jurisdiction-specific analysis that exceeded typical divorce proceeding requirements. The appointment with Harrison Financial Advisory Services occurred in their downtown Boston office, where Managing Director Robert Harrison provided immediate validation of my investment management capabilities through recognition of sophisticated portfolio construction strategies and risk management techniques that had generated substantial returns across multiple market cycles and economic environments. Mrs. Chen, the international diversification and sector allocation strategies evident in your portfolio demonstrate exceptional understanding of global market dynamics and regulatory arbitrage opportunities, Director Harrison observed while reviewing comprehensive documentation of my investment activities over the preceding 12 years. The performance outcomes achieved through these sophisticated positioning strategies exceed industry benchmarks by substantial margins while maintaining appropriate risk management protocols. The professional validation from established financial services expert provided crucial confirmation that my investment management capabilities represented genuine expertise rather than amateur speculation or fortunate market timing during favorable economic conditions. The recognition would prove essential for establishing credible foundation during divorce proceedings where Morrison family members would necessarily attempt to minimize significance of wealth accumulation through alternative explanations that preserved their comfortable assumptions about capability hierarchies. The documentation process revealed the comprehensive scope of asset management activities that had occurred parallel to my marriage relationship while remaining completely invisible to family members who had systematically dismissed my intellectual capabilities and professional competence. The portfolio included positions across emerging technology companies, international real estate investments, currency hedging strategies, and sophisticated derivative instruments that required advanced analytical capabilities and extensive market research for effective implementation. The third component of initial transformation involved strategic preparation for social and professional contexts, where revelation of my actual circumstances would necessarily disrupt established relationship dynamics and require careful management of reputation protection, while achieving appropriate recognition of capabilities that had been systematically concealed through strategic invisibility approaches. The professional networking activities that had been constrained through wealth concealment strategies could now be expanded through authentic engagement with institutional investment management professionals and high-net-worth client advisors, who appreciated sophisticated analytical capabilities and strategic thinking skills that commanded premium compensation and prestigious client relationships. The first opportunity for professional identity disclosure occurred during quarterly investment conference sponsored by Boston Financial Managers Association, where my registration as principal of Chen Investment Management Services provided immediate recognition of institutional credentials and professional standing that contradicted assumptions about my career limitations and intellectual capabilities. The conference presentation that I delivered about international regulatory arbitrage strategies for technology sector investments generated substantial interest from sophisticated financial professionals who recognized innovative approaches to complex analytical challenges that required advanced expertise and strategic thinking capabilities. The positive reception provided validation that my investment management capabilities could command appropriate recognition and professional respect within established institutional networks. Ms. Chen, your analysis of regulatory positioning strategies across complementary Asian markets provides exactly the type of sophisticated framework that our institutional clients require for international technology exposure, commented Senior Portfolio Manager Jennifer Walsh of Wellington Asset Management following my presentation. We would be interested in discussing potential collaboration opportunities for specialized mandate management that leverages your expertise in emerging market regulatory dynamics. The professional recognition from established institutional investment manager represented crucial validation that transformation from strategic invisibility toward authentic professional engagement could generate meaningful career advancement opportunities while providing intellectual stimulation and peer recognition that marriage relationships had systematically denied. The fourth element of transformation implementation involved careful coordination of social disclosure strategies that would manage family relationship disruption while establishing new foundation for interactions based on accurate understanding of capabilities and contributions, rather than comfortable assumptions about intellectual hierarchies and financial dependency that had enabled systematic marginalization and exploitation. The family dinner scheduled for the following weekend provided initial opportunity for managing social revelation of changed circumstances, while maintaining appropriate boundaries around personal information and strategic objectives for divorce proceeding outcomes. The preparation required development of communication strategies that would acknowledge changed relationship dynamics without providing unnecessary detail about asset positions or legal strategies that required confidentiality protection. Eleanor Morrison's response to news about divorce proceedings revealed immediate concern about family reputation management and social positioning within established Boston networks, where appropriate marriage relationships were considered essential for maintaining standing and credibility among peer families with similar backgrounds and social expectations. Victoria, I hope you will consider the broader implications of divorce proceedings for family relationships and social standing that affects everyone involved, rather than making decisions based on temporary emotional concerns that could be resolved through enhanced communication and strategic counseling. Eleanor stated, with combination of diplomatic concern and strategic pressure designed to preserve existing relationship arrangements that served Morrison family interests. The response demonstrated her automatic assumption that divorce decisions reflected emotional instability rather than strategic analysis of relationship dynamics that had become incompatible with authentic partnership and mutual respect between equals with comparable capabilities and contributions to marriage outcomes and shared lifestyle maintenance. However, the transformation process had included comprehensive preparation for family resistance strategies that would attempt to preserve existing hierarchies through emotional manipulation and social pressure rather than acknowledging legitimate concerns about systematic marginalization and intellectual appropriation that had eliminated genuine partnership possibilities. Eleanor, the decision reflects careful consideration of relationship dynamics that have become incompatible with mutual respect and authentic partnership. I replied with professional composure that eliminated emotional vulnerability while establishing clear boundaries around acceptable discussion topics during family interactions. The transformation represents strategic choice for personal integrity rather than temporary emotional response to communication challenges. The systematic nature of transformation implementation required consistent messaging across all social and professional contexts, that established new identity presentation based on authentic capabilities rather than strategic concealment that had enabled systematic underestimation and marginalization throughout 13 years of marriage relationship. The consistency would prove essential for achieving credibility and appropriate recognition during divorce proceedings, where comprehensive documentation would eliminate ambiguity about individual contributions and professional competence levels. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.